Hi, thanks for stopping by. Today I have a great pattern to share with you again. This one's called Zinnias in Bloom. You'll see it here on my wall in the fall color theme. And there's so many other ways that you can make this Zinnias in Bloom quilt. I have one here that is done in the summer and spring colorway. And today I'm going to be sharing with you the blocks that we'll use to make this quilt in Christmas theme. Hi, my name is Lori Dickman. Thank you for joining me today. This is Quilting with Lori. If you like what I share with you regarding all of the patterns and the blocks, please be sure to like and subscribe and make sure you comment below too. I love to hear from my viewers. So let's take a look at this pattern here on my tabletop. So here is the pattern. It's the Zinnias in Bloom pattern, which I'll have out on my website, and I'll have links below to this. And this is the instructions on the inside for making the blocks and for putting the pattern together. And you will find a paper templates for the center circle of the zinnia as well as the bloom, the little petal, the flower petal. And we'll be making plastic templates using these paper templates in the pattern. So the pattern itself gives you the information for cutting requirements, and of course you're going to need background squares. And so I have 3 of the background squares, and this is a color, this is a Christmas colorway that I'm using for this particular quilt. And then you'll see here other pieces that we'll be using for this particular quilt. Here are some 3.5 by 12.5 inch background strips, and they'll be used for the stems. We have our circles, which you're going to need for the zinnia blooms, and here are the little petals that we'll be using, and these squares will be used to cut triangles to create our stems for the zinnia blooms. And this of course is the plastic template that I created using my paper template so that I could in fact cut out all of the zinnia blooms as well as the circle. So to create the plastic templates, you can purchase this template film at Hobby Lobby, at Joann's, at your quilt shops, online. It's just something that's readily available, and it's very handy to have around. Basically what you do is lay this plastic template on top of the paper template and then trace around. Here's one thing you want to keep in mind for this applique purpose here. With this pattern, you'll notice that there is a dark center line, which would be the cutting line if you are going to use fusible web or glue-based applique. If, however, you plan to do needle turn applique, then you're going to cut on that outside seam allowance line because you're going to need that 1/4 inch seam allowance to be able to turn it under as you are doing needle turn applique. So decide which applique method you plan to use. I will be using glue-based. Glue-based and fusible basically use the same techniques where you're going to cut on the dark line for the circle and for the blooms. You're going to need a total of 12 blooms for each flower and then 1 circle. So you'll see I have my circles here and I have all of my blooms here. I use 3 different fabrics in this case, and I'll have a total of 12 blooms on each of these zinnias. And I like to use the I like to use the glue-based method of applique, and I like to use Roxanne's glue-based. It has a nice long needle nose here where I can actually get very tiny little drops of glue out, which is perfect for my purpose. So let me show you how I do this. Some of these I've already glued down. I basically took the background square and I have folded it on itself into quarters and then pressed in these creases so that I know how to center the zinnia on that square. And what I'm going to do is just basically take a little dot of the glue-based and place it down there on the background. Doesn't need much. Basically, I just need enough glue to get this project to my sewing machine to applique. You really don't need to use much glue at all. I think I've done that one. Let's go over here and do some more here. So I'm overlapping these blooms on one side, so they're all overlapping on that. Whoops, this one is not, so I've got to fix that. I like to have them all overlapping on the same side as I lay them down. And then of course this center circle will be glue basted down once I have everything here. Before you actually start glue basting anything, make sure that you've got your blooms on there, and then make sure that your center circle actually does cover everything properly. You don't want to be glue basting things down or using fusible and press anything down if this center circle is not positioned properly, or if there's too much of a hole there for you. So you do need to check that out before you do any glue basting or fusible. So I am going to get all 3 blocks positioned properly and glue basted, and then I'll take them up to the sewing machine and I will applique, and I'll demonstrate how I'm going to applique this. And I'll also be creating the leaf blocks, which are these blocks here. So we're going to see how this one is appliqued, and we're going to see how this stem, actually it's a stem block, how that's put together with some side strips of background fabric. And we're using squares in which we're going to cut into triangles and sew them together to make those beautiful stems. So let's head upstairs to the sewing machine and we will get that started. So as you can see here, I have the center circle embroidered, appliqued on first, and I did use a beautiful thread and applique thread, or rayon thread, that matches this circle color. I do like to do my center circles first. I like to applique those first. That way it secures everything around this. And next I'm going to change the thread. I'm going to put in the red embroidery thread, and then I'm going to applique all around the blooms, and we'll get that done next. And one thing I want to point out is whenever you're appliquing any type of Dresden, and this is a form of a Dresden, onto background squares, definitely take advantage of the beautiful fancy stitches that you have on your domestic sewing machine. And here I've taken advantage of one of those stitches. Hopefully you can see that stitch. It's a very pretty stitch. It's called a hem stitch, but it really secures everything down. I do like to use the glue-based method of applique only because it's such a soft, it leaves the block so very soft, and it allows me to do some beautiful quilting on there. Sometimes when you're using a fusible, and there are some very light fusible, there's a soft fuse, which is a very light fuse, and it works very well. But I just don't feel that I can quilt as nicely on my squares and on my applique pieces using the fusible. So I just really do enjoy glue-based applique whenever I can. Okay, so for the block, it is now appliqued. I used a patchwork applique stitch around each of the blades to applique them down. And the block has a really nice soft hand, and I really love that in order to do the quilting when we finish the quilt. So now I will take the other 2 blocks, which the 12.5-inch blocks, background blocks, which I have pressed so that there are creases on all 4 corners there, and I will work at getting the blades placed on each of the blocks along with the center circles, and I'll get all of that appliqued. You're going to be needing 3 blocks total, so 3 of these blocks are necessary for this quilt. For the stem blocks, and we're going to be creating 3 of those stem blocks, which is what the beautiful little flower sits on. We're going to be using the squares, the 4-inch squares and the 5-inch squares that we have cut. And from the 4-inch background squares, you're going to take every one of those 12 4-inch squares and cut it on the diagonal to have 2 triangles. You'll do that with all of those. For all of the 5-inch squares that have the stem fabric, and in my case I use kind of a turquoise here, you're going to take every one of those 5-inch squares and cut it on the diagonal to create 2 triangles. So we'll have 12 total triangles of this fabric, and we'll have 24 triangles of this fabric. let me cut those apart and I'll be right back. So to create these flying geese units, we're going to use the larger triangle as the base, as I have here, and 2 of the smaller triangles as I show here. Now what you're going to want to do is take one of the smaller triangles and line it up so that the bottom of it lines up beautifully with the base of that larger triangle, and you're going to stitch right along here in a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So let me do that first. Then what we're going to do, and I like to press it toward the dark. Now we're going to take the second one and again flip it over onto the larger triangle. So the second small triangle flips onto the larger triangle. Again, we're lining it up across the base here, and we're going to stitch a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance out there along that line right there. So let me do that. And here we have our flying geese unit. Now it needs to be squared up to 3.5 by 6.5 inches, which is what I've done to this one already. We're going to make a total of 4 flying geese units for each stem. So you're going to need a total of 12 flying geese units to be able to complete the wall quilt. So here I'm simply sewing the stem pieces together to create the stem for one of the blooms, and I'm going to add the last stem here, the last flying geese unit. So they're all put together and ready to go into the quilt. We need to get it pressed, and then we'll need to add the strips. So now that we have the flying geese stem unit pressed and ready to go, we're going to add these 2 outer strips, the 3.5 by 12.5 inch background strips that are going to be added to each side to complete that block. So I'll get that sewn and I'll be right back. So here are the 2 completed blocks, the blooms block and the stem block. And they're so long that I placed them sideways on the table so that you can see both of them together. But you'll make 3 of each of these blocks to be able to complete your Zinnias quilt. So I don't have my Christmas fabric zinnia block finished yet, or the zinnia quilt finished yet, but I will get that done, and I'll add a link to the description box below so that you can see a photo of it when I have it finished and quilted. I will also do a video real quickly of some of the quilting that I did on the fall colorway of the zinnia block there, so that you can get some ideas on how to quilt the quilt. Thanks again for stopping by my channel today. Again, I'm Lori Dickman. This is Quilting with Lori, and I hope you've enjoyed this beautiful zinnia bloom quilt. There's so many different colors that you can use, so many different seasons that you can make this quilt for. So I hope you enjoy it. I will have a link in the description box below for the pattern, which will be out on my website. Thank you so much. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.